Welcome. Today we are focusing on changes in equilibrium. Please subscribe so that you do not miss the next lesson. In the previous lesson, we examined both demand and supply, including how changes in price affect quantity demanded and quantity supplied. We also introduced the factors that can cause demand and supply to shift. And finally, we looked at how these interact to determine market equilibrium. In this lesson, we will build on that foundation by exploring how changes in demand and supply lead to changes in market equilibrium, and how these shifts affect equilibrium price and quantity. We will first look at how change in price affect equilibrium, and later look at how change in demand and supply affect equilibrium. Remember that equilibrium is the market clearing price, and at this point, consumers are willing to buy exactly what producers are willing to supply at the price. But what happens when prices change? Looking at this example, what is the effect of an increase in price on demand? The focus is being on demand on this question. So an increase in price from equilibrium price to P2, we draw a line at P2 that will meet our demand curve. And at that point, we draw a line that will show the quantity that will be demanded at price P2. So the effect is that as price increases to P2, quantity demanded decreases to Q1. And the movement is along the demand curve, moving from equilibrium to point A on the demand curve. And at point A, we can see that there is a gap between supply and demand. And supply is greater than demand. Therefore, there is an excess supply in the market. When there's excess supply in the market, producers reduce prices to increase demand or to stimulate demand. So as price decreases, demand increases, and the market restores itself back to equilibrium. Let's look at the next example. What is the effect of an increase in price on supply? An increase in price is at P2. We draw a line that will meet our supply curve. And then we draw a line down that will show the quantity that will be supplied at that price. So as price increases, quantity supplied increases to Q2, and the movement is along the supply curve, moving from equilibrium to point A on the supply curve. But there is a gap now between supply and demand. And supply is greater than demand, meaning that there is excess supply in the market. And as already explained, when there's excess supply in the market, producers reduce prices to stimulate demand. And as prices decreases, demand increases, and the market is restored back to equilibrium. Let us look at the last example. What is the effect of a decrease in price on demand and supply? The decrease in price will be at P1. So we draw a line that will meet both demand and supply at P1. And we can see that at P1, quantity supplied is at Q1 and quantity demanded is at Q2. So what is the effect? So a decrease in price leads to a decrease in quantity supplied and an increase in quantity demanded. And we can see that demand is greater than supply. So there is now an excess demand in the market. And when there's an excess demand in the market, prices tend to increase, or producers increase prices and their supply as well. And as prices increase, demand decreases as things are becoming expensive. So the market restores itself back to equilibrium. So we can see that when it comes to demand, to change in price, the market restores itself back to equilibrium. In summary, when prices are above the equilibrium price, there's an excess supply in the market, and producers decrease prices, and as prices decrease, demand increases and equilibrium is restored. When prices are below the equilibrium price, there's an excess demand in the market. And when there's an excess demand in the market, producers increase prices. And as prices increase, demand decreases, and the market restores itself back to equilibrium. Let us now look at how change in demand and supply affect equilibrium. Change in demand and supply, remember that it's a shift in either the demand curve or the supply curve. And there are factors that shift either the demand curve or the supply curve. And as a revision, as we discussed them in the last lesson, these are the factors that shift the demand curve and the factors that shift the supply curve. Let us look at this next example. What is the effect of an increase in income on demand and supply? We know that income affects the demand curve. So this is the first question that you ask yourself. What does income affect? Does it affect demand or supply? And it definitely affects the demand curve. So an increase in income will definitely lead to an increase in demand. This will then shift the demand curve to the right or upward. And the new intersection, that is where demand now meets the supply, is at this point here. So this is where now we draw the line that will show the quantity that will be demanded. So there is an increase in demand, and quantity demanded increases to Q2. And what about price? We can see now that price is at P2, that it has increased to P2. As demand increases, price increases to P2. What about supply? What happens to the supply curve? The supply curve does not shift. The movement is along the curve. As price increases, supply increases to this point here. So our new equilibrium is at point E1. And how do you explain your graph after drawing it? You say an increase in income leads to an increase in demand as consumers have more to spend. This shifts the demand curve to the right or upward from D to D1. Quantity demanded increases from QE to Q2, and price increases from PE to P2. As price increases, supply increases, and the movement is along the curve. Equilibrium is now at a higher point, is at E1. This will definitely get you the full mark on an example like this one. Second example, what is the effect of a decrease in the cost of inputs on demand and supply? The first question you ask yourself is that what does cost of inputs affect? Is it demand or supply? And it is definitely supply. So as the cost decreases, it becomes cheaper to produce, and therefore production increases, shifting the supply curve to the right. And the new intersection is now at this point here. And this is where you draw your line to show the quantity that will be supplied. So quantity supplied increases to Q2. And you show this by an arrow to show where the shift is. And as quantity increases, prices decrease to P1, to price P1. And the new equilibrium is at E1. Because as price decrease, demand increases. So our new equilibrium is at E1. The shift is only on the supply curve, and when it comes to demand curve, the movement is along the curve. What about this example? What is the effect of a decrease in the number of suppliers? We know that as suppliers decrease, this means that the supply curve will shift to the left. It shifts to the left to curve S1. And our new intersection is at this point. This is where you draw your line to show that quantity decreases to Q1. And as quantity decreases to Q1, price increases to P2. And we have our new equilibrium at E1. And when it comes to the demand curve, as price increase, the movement is along the demand curve, and demand decreases to point E1. So the only way to master demand and supply is through practice. Thank you for listening. The next lesson will be on elasticity of demand and supply.